Let me begin by asking you this: how does a conflict so improbable, so seemingly distant from the world's radar, suddenly erupt into a geopolitical earthquake shaking the very foundations of global power? That is the question we must confront today as we discuss the extraordinary clash unfolding between Israel and Yemen, what I call the war nobody saw coming. Yemen, a nation long relegated to the margins of global attention, has suddenly emerged from the shadows and placed itself at the center of one of the most surprising geopolitical confrontations of recent years. For decades, the international community viewed Yemen through a narrow lens, a country ravaged by poverty, destabilized by civil war, and burdened by one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. The assumption was simple: Yemen was too weak, too fragmented, and too insignificant to alter the balance of power in the Middle East. Yet today, against all expectations, this very nation has confronted Israel, one of the most militarily advanced states in the region. The irony is striking, and the implications are profound. How does a nation so often dismissed as powerless suddenly become a player capable of shaking global headlines? That question is the hook pulling the world into this unlikely conflict. To understand Yemen's emergence, one must look beyond the surface images of famine and destruction. True, the country has been devastated by years of conflict between the Houthis and a Saudi-led coalition, leaving millions in dire conditions. But hidden within this struggle was the rise of a hardened resistance movement shaped by survival, asymmetrical warfare, and the determination to defy external control. Yemen's fighters are not conventional soldiers. They are guerrillas, tacticians of irregular warfare, capable of using limited resources to inflict disproportionate damage. This is not just desperation, it is strategic resilience, and it is precisely what makes Yemen's sudden confrontation with Israel so shocking to outside observers. Israel, by contrast, is a nation defined by its technological superiority, its cutting-edge missile defense systems, and its close military partnership with the United States. For decades, Israel projected an aura of invincibility built on its ability to dominate its neighbors in both technology and intelligence. Yet the very fact that Yemen dared to challenge such a power reveals something crucial in today's world. The mightiest armies can still be unsettled by the most unlikely of challengers. This is not about Yemen overpowering Israel militarily, it is about Yemen shattering the myth of untouchability. The hook here is unmistakable. The David and Goliath narrative reappears, but this time with consequences that reverberate across the entire Middle East. Yemen's boldness also signals the collapse of a long-standing narrative imposed on the region. The assumption that only wealthy or heavily armed nations could meaningfully shape events is now eroding. Instead, we are witnessing a reality in which smaller states, through persistence, alliances, and symbolic defiance, can alter the course of history. What shocks analysts most is not simply that Yemen has fired missiles or drones at Israel. It is that these actions resonate far beyond the battlefield. Each strike, whether successful or not, carries the weight of symbolism, telling the world that resistance is possible, even from the most unlikely corners. For ordinary citizens watching this conflict unfold, especially across the global south, Yemen's sudden rise from obscurity sends a powerful message. Weakness can be transformed into strength when survival demands it, and invisibility can become visibility when the stakes are high enough. That message, more than the rockets themselves, is what makes this war so significant. The emergence of Yemen as a direct challenger to Israel is not just a story of conflict, it is a story of transformation, of a nation stepping out of the shadows and onto the stage of history in a way that nobody, not even seasoned policymakers, truly saw coming. Israel, long regarded as one of the most formidable military powers in the Middle East, now finds itself dangerously stretched thin in a way that few analysts had predicted. The nation has always prided itself on its ability to fight multiple wars, to dominate its enemies with superior technology, and to maintain an iron grip over its regional security environment. Yet at this moment, Israel is facing a reality that cuts at the heart of that narrative. On one front, it is locked in a relentless conflict with Gaza, a war that refuses to end and drains both resources and political capital. On another, Hezbollah in Lebanon continues to pose a constant threat, testing Israel's northern border with increasing boldness. And now, unexpectedly, Israel is engaged in a confrontation with Yemen, hundreds of miles away, creating a situation where it is fighting not one or two, but multiple adversaries across vast and complicated battlefields. The hook here is undeniable. A country known for its strength is suddenly showing the cracks of overextension. What makes this moment especially striking is the sheer geography of the conflict. Israel's traditional military doctrine was built on rapid, decisive strikes within its immediate neighborhood, operations designed to neutralize threats before they spiraled into wider wars. But Yemen changes that equation entirely. Unlike Gaza or Lebanon, Yemen is not next door. It lies far to the south, requiring Israel to project its military power across long distances, straining logistics, intelligence, and defense capabilities in ways that were never part of its core strategy. Every missile fired from Yemen, every drone that crosses the Red Sea, forces Israel to expand its defense perimeter and spend resources on a conflict that was never supposed to be on its radar. The hook for global audiences is clear. Israel, the regional giant, is now chasing shadows on a battlefield it did not choose. At the same time, Israel is not only stretched geographically but also politically. Domestically, its government faces rising pressure as citizens question how many wars the nation can fight simultaneously. Internationally, the perception of Israel as an unbeatable power is beginning to waver. Allies like the United States are being called upon to provide more weapons, more intelligence, and more diplomatic cover, yet Washington itself is grappling with its own fatigue from endless wars and a shifting global order. This raises a provocative question. What happens when Israel's primary backer begins to falter under the weight of these crises? The possibility that even American support cannot guarantee Israel's dominance is a hook that challenges long-held assumptions about power in the region. The danger for Israel lies not only in the physical drain of fighting on multiple fronts, but also in the psychological impact. Enemies across the Middle East are watching closely. Hezbollah sees the opportunity to increase pressure. Iran calculates how to exploit the situation, and smaller groups, once too cautious to act, now sense vulnerability. In war, perception can be as decisive as firepower. If Israel begins to look overstretched, that image alone emboldens others to test its limits further. What began as isolated conflicts may spiral into a convergence of challenges that Israel, for the first time in decades, may not be able to fully control. This moment, then, is more than just another military campaign for Israel. It is a test of its very capacity to maintain regional dominance while juggling simultaneous crises. Stretched thin across Gaza, Lebanon, and now Yemen, Israel faces the sobering reality that even the strongest armies can be worn down when forced to fight too many battles at once. And that revelation, for its friends and foes alike, is what makes this conflict not only dangerous but historic. This conflict between Israel and Yemen is not simply about missiles, drones, or military maneuvers. At its core, it is a battle of narratives, a war over meaning and symbolism that goes far beyond the battlefield. Every rocket fired from Yemen toward Israel may or may not succeed in reaching its target, but the political and psychological impact is already undeniable. Yemen, long regarded as too weak to matter, has declared itself a participant in a struggle that challenges not just Israel's military capabilities, but its image as an untouchable power. The hook here is striking. A nation dismissed as powerless is rewriting the narrative of resistance, while Israel, despite its arsenal, finds itself fighting an opponent whose greatest weapon is not technology, but symbolism. For Israel, the problem is layered. Its defense systems may intercept rockets, but interception does not erase the message those rockets carry. Each launch sends a signal to the world that Israel's dominance can be contested, that its skies are not impenetrable, and that its enemies are unafraid to test its defenses. The symbolism of defiance resonates far beyond the immediate conflict zone. Across the Middle East and even into the global South, Yemen's actions are being celebrated as proof that even the smallest and most embattled nations can confront what many perceive as an empire built on military superiority and foreign backing. This is not simply about damage inflicted, it is about the image of defiance itself, and that image is spreading rapidly. For Yemen, the narrative is one of transformation. For decades, the country has been portrayed in the global media as a humanitarian tragedy, a place of famine, instability, and civil war. But now, with each strike against Israel, Yemen shifts that narrative toward one of agency, resistance, and resilience. The Houthis, once portrayed as a fragmented militia, now frame themselves as defenders of the Palestinian cause, part of a broader regional struggle against domination. This framing matters. It gives Yemen a political and moral significance that far outweighs its economic or military capacity. The hook that emerges here is powerful weakness, when reframed through narrative, becomes a form of strength that resonates across borders. For the international community, particularly the United States and its allies, the danger is that Yemen's actions inspire others. If Yemen can challenge Israel symbolically, then perhaps other smaller nations, groups, or movements may begin to see opportunities where they once saw only risk. The spread of this narrative of resistance against overwhelming odds is harder to contain than rockets or drones. It circulates through media networks, social platforms, and diplomatic channels, influencing public opinion in ways that military power cannot easily silence. Israel may win the military exchanges, but if it loses the narrative war, it loses something far more difficult to recover: the perception of invulnerability. This is why the conflict feels larger than itself. It is not merely about whether rockets land or fail, but about who controls the story those rockets tell. Yemen has managed to shift the conversation from being a victim of war to being a participant in a struggle that captures the imagination of millions. Israel, for all its strength, finds itself struggling to control this narrative, and as history has often shown, wars of symbolism can sometimes outlast wars of weapons, with consequences that ripple across generations. The hook that should not be missed is this: while Israel may intercept the rockets, it cannot as easily intercept the meaning those rockets carry. One of the most striking elements of this unexpected conflict between Israel and Yemen is that Yemen is not acting in isolation. To view this as a simple clash between two nations would be to miss the broader reality shaping events. What we are truly seeing is the ripple effect of alliances, networks of support, influence, and strategy that extend far beyond the Red Sea and the Middle East. Every missile launched from Yemen toward Israel carries with it the fingerprints of regional calculations and global rivalries. This is not just Yemen challenging Israel, it is a reflection of how alliances, both formal and informal, are reshaping the contours of modern warfare. The hook is clear: what looks like a two-sided war is, in fact, a multi-layered confrontation with far-reaching implications. Iran stands at the center of this dynamic. Long regarded as the principal supporter of the Houthis in Yemen, Iran has cultivated an alliance that provides more than weapons. It offers training, technology, and a sense of ideological purpose. For Tehran, Yemen is a strategic card, a way to pressure Israel and the United States without committing to direct confrontation. Every action by Yemen against Israel signals Iran's growing reach, proving that its influence is no longer confined to its borders or even its immediate neighbors. This proxy dimension adds a layer of complexity to the conflict, one that ensures Israel cannot view Yemen in isolation but must instead recognize it as part of a wider network of adversaries. The hook here is compelling. Small actors can punch above their weight when backed by larger powers with their own agendas. Yet Iran is not the only player shaping this moment. Saudi Arabia, traditionally the dominant force in Yemen's conflict, finds itself in a precarious position. Once determined to crush the Houthis, Riyadh now watches uneasily as Yemen expands its reach toward Israel. The possibility of Saudi Arabia being dragged into a wider confrontation complicates its attempts to balance relationships with both Washington and regional rivals. For the Saudis, this war is a reminder that their unfinished business in Yemen is spilling into new arenas, threatening to undermine their fragile diplomatic maneuvers. The hook for observers is that wars no longer stay confined, they bleed across borders and drag reluctant players into the fray. On the global stage, other powers are watching carefully. Russia and China, already deepening their influence in the Middle East, view this conflict as an opportunity. Moscow sees a chance to weaken American allies by encouraging instability that distracts Washington from other theaters, such as Ukraine. Beijing, more cautious, uses the conflict to advance its long-term goal of positioning itself as a diplomatic alternative to the U.S., offering mediation while quietly securing its interests in shipping lanes and energy markets. These powers do not need to be directly involved to shape the conflict. Their presence as alternative poles of influence already shifts the balance. The hook is unmistakable. A regional war has become a stage for global competition. For Israel and the U.S., the ripple effect of these alliances is deeply unsettling. What might have once been framed as a manageable threat now appears as part of a much broader chessboard. Israel cannot strike Yemen without considering Iran. The U.S. cannot support Israel without worrying about antagonizing Saudi Arabia or fueling further instability. Each move creates new risks, new calculations, new unintended consequences. The power of alliances lies in their ability to expand the battlefield without firing additional shots, and that is exactly what we are seeing unfold. The war nobody saw coming has revealed something larger. No conflict today is truly local, and every strike carries the potential to redraw the global order. When conflicts erupt in the Middle East, the battlefield is rarely confined to the territory where rockets fall or drones are launched. The effects ripple outward, shaking economies, unsettling markets, and disrupting the delicate arteries of global trade. The confrontation between Israel and Yemen is a clear reminder of this truth, with its impact already stretching far beyond military calculations. What makes this conflict especially significant is its proximity to one of the world's most vital economic lifelines, the Red Sea. The shipping lanes that pass through this narrow waterway carry vast amounts of oil, gas, and goods, feeding economies from Europe to Asia. Each escalation between Israel and Yemen raises the specter of disruption in this critical corridor, and that possibility alone is enough to rattle investors, traders, and policymakers worldwide. The hook is powerful. A war that seemed distant suddenly threatens to reach into wallets and energy bills across the globe. Yemen's position along the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a choke point through which millions of barrels of oil pass daily, transforms its military actions into more than symbolic gestures. A single missile strike near these shipping routes, even if it fails to hit its target, injects uncertainty into global supply chains. Shipping companies wary of risk reroute vessels, driving up costs. Insurance premiums soar. Oil prices, highly sensitive to any hint of instability in transit corridors, respond with spikes that ripple through every level of the global economy, from transportation costs to food prices to consumer goods. Here lies one of the hidden strengths of Yemen's strategy. Even without overwhelming firepower, it possesses the geographic leverage to create disproportionate economic disruption. The hook is sharp. Yemen may lack wealth, but its position allows it to shake the wealth of others. For Israel, the economic consequences are equally troubling. Wars are expensive, but wars that provoke global market disruptions also undermine diplomatic support. When European nations see energy costs rise, when Asian economies feel pressure on supply chains, the question quickly shifts from sympathy for Israel's security to frustration with the instability the conflict fuels. That shift in perception matters. Israel, already criticized in many global forums for its policies toward Palestine, now risks being seen as a source of wider economic instability. In the arena of global opinion, that narrative weakens Israel's position, even as it seeks military victories on the battlefield. The United States, too, feels the sting of these economic ripples. As the guarantor of Middle Eastern stability for decades, Washington cannot afford to appear unable to protect trade routes or prevent disruptions. Yet the more it commits to securing the Red Sea, the more it finds itself drawn deeper into a conflict it did not anticipate. The irony is glaring. The world's most powerful navy may be forced to respond to missile launches from one of the world's poorest nations, simply because of the economic importance of the waters Yemen borders. This imbalance underscores the broader lesson. Military power does not guarantee economic security when geography favors the underdog. The larger global picture is even more revealing. For nations like China, which relies heavily on Middle Eastern energy supplies, instability in the Red Sea heightens its urgency to diversify supply chains and expand its own naval presence. For Russia, the chaos offers a strategic advantage, as higher oil prices can bolster its own revenues in the midst of its standoff with the West. The war between Israel and Yemen, therefore, does not just challenge security, it reshapes economic strategies from Beijing to Moscow. And for ordinary people worldwide, the hook is unavoidable. A war fought hundreds of miles away can still appear at the gas pump, the grocery store, and the electricity bill. For decades, the United States has presented itself as the ultimate guarantor of stability in the Middle East, the unquestioned power whose alliances, military bases, and naval fleets ensured control over the region's conflicts. But the war between Israel and Yemen is exposing cracks in that image of dominance, forcing Washington to confront a reality it has long tried to ignore. Its hegemony in the Middle East is no longer absolute. What makes this conflict so dangerous for the U.S. is not only the immediate challenge of supporting Israel while containing regional instability, but the deeper message it sends to allies and adversaries alike that American power, once seen as unshakable, can be tested and stretched. The hook here is unmistakable. A confrontation in one of the world's poorest nations has become a mirror reflecting the limits of the world's richest superpower. The U.S. has poured trillions into Middle Eastern wars over the past 2 decades, from Iraq to Afghanistan, from Syria to counterterrorism operations across the region. Yet, despite this massive expenditure, its ability to dictate outcomes has steadily eroded. The war in Yemen adds another layer to this decline. Washington is now caught in a dilemma. On the one hand, it cannot afford to allow Israel, its closest ally in the region, to appear vulnerable. On the other hand, deeper involvement risks dragging the U.S. into yet another open-ended conflict, draining resources and political will at home. Every missile fired from Yemen at Israel is, in a sense, also aimed at Washington's reputation. The hook that resonates is this: the most powerful nation on earth finds itself repeatedly forced to react rather than dictate terms. The broader perception is equally important. Allies across the Middle East, whether Saudi Arabia, the UAE, or even Turkey, are watching closely. They measure America's responses not only in terms of military strength, but in terms of credibility. If the U.S. cannot secure shipping lanes in the Red Sea, if it cannot shield Israel from unexpected adversaries, then its promise of security begins to ring hollow. This matters because credibility is the foundation of hegemony. Once allies begin to question whether Washington can deliver on its commitments, they inevitably start hedging, exploring alternative partnerships with powers like China and Russia. That slow drift away from exclusive reliance on the U.S. has already begun, and the Israel-Yemen conflict accelerates it. For adversaries, the lesson is even clearer. Iran sees in this war an opportunity to highlight American overreach. Russia understands that every ounce of U.S. attention spent on Yemen and Israel is attention diverted from Ukraine. China, ever patient, positions itself as a broker of peace while quietly using America's entanglements to expand its own influence in trade and infrastructure. Each of these powers benefits not by directly entering the conflict, but by letting Washington expend its energy, money, and credibility. The hook is sharp. American hegemony is not being overthrown in one dramatic moment, but chipped away gradually through wars it never wanted but cannot avoid. For ordinary Americans, the implications are just as real. Endless military involvement abroad drains resources that could be used for infrastructure, healthcare, or education at home. Each conflict adds to a sense of fatigue, a growing frustration with the idea that the U.S. must always play the role of global policeman. As Israel finds itself in a war with Yemen, Americans are left to ask, why should their taxes, their soldiers, and their future be tied to conflicts with no clear end? That question is itself a hook, a reminder that hegemony is not only challenged abroad, it is questioned at home. The war between Israel and Yemen, therefore, is not just a test for Israel, it is a test for the United States, a confrontation that reveals how fragile its claim to uncontested dominance has become. Every move in this conflict underscores a larger truth. The age of unquestioned American power in the Middle East is fading, and the world is watching what comes next. Let me leave you with this: history is full of wars no one expected, wars that began at the margins but ended by reshaping empires. Israel versus Yemen may appear as an unlikely headline today, but it may well be remembered tomorrow as a spark that accelerated the decline of unquestioned U.S. dominance in the Middle East. This is not simply a war between two nations, it is a mirror reflecting the instability of an entire world order. And that, my friends, is why this war that nobody saw coming may yet be the one that changes everything. Thank you.